Welcome to the Bert Kellogg Collection, Port Angeles Slide Set 1. The North Olympic Library System maintains a collection of late 19th and early 20th century photographs from a donation by Bert Kellogg in the 1970s of over 5,000 photos and negatives. Bert Kellogg came to Port Angeles in 1940 with only 10% vision in one eye and the other blind. He discovered with the aid of a powerful magnifying lens he could see enough for photographic work. For over 30 years, Kellogg collected photographs of old places, people, trains, Native American customs, and logging, which he then copied and restored. Some photographs were borrowed from old-timers, some found in old trunks or rummage sales. Port Angeles looked like this when the settlers arrived. Huge timber was everywhere. There was no way to cut down the large trees, so the settlers cut the smaller trees for cabins and fuel and used the refuge to burn the big ones during the rainy season to get rid of them. The original town of Port Angeles was located at the mouth of Valley Creek at about 2nd and Valley Street. In the winter of 1863, the Customs House on the left of this image and most of the existing Port Angeles was washed away when a natural earth dam caused by a slide released a flood down Valley Creek. The population of Port Angeles shrank from nearly 400 people to only 12. This is the earliest known photograph of the Port Angeles area, showing the harbor and the base of Edith's Hook. This view shows downtown Port Angeles in 1886. Merchants Hotel is on the left of what is now the corner of Front and Laurel Streets. The white building is the old Morse Trading Post and the post office. The Morse dock ran out into deep water used for supply and passenger ships. The white building is the Globe Hotel. The base of the spit is in the distance. Peabody Creek was originally named Norman's Creek and once ran through downtown. This view shows the Merchants Hotel on the right and the Globe Hotel on the left. Valley Creek was called Warrener's Creek, and Tumwater was Nellie's Run in the old maps. Taken in 1892, this picture is one of the homes that survived the flood of 1863. The Marr home sat on a knoll at 2nd and Peabody and fell down shortly after this picture was taken. In 1887, Port Angeles had 39 residents. This is a view looking west down Front Street. This 1887 view from the Morse dock shows the Merchants Hotel on the right, and the white center building is the Morse store. It is thought that the crowd in the picture is the entire population of Port Angeles of that time. This view of Front Street in 1887 shows the Globe Hotel on the right and the Merchants Hotel on the left. Looking east on Front Street in the winter of 1889, Peabody Creek is shown at high tide. The Central Hotel on the right later became the Globe Hotel. In 1888, all the residents of Port Angeles turned out for the 4th of July celebration. Taken in 1888, we see all the residents of Port Angeles. The wooden trough running above people's head was the first Port Angeles water system. Water came from Peabody Creek and ran along Morse Dock, allowing ships to get fresh water. The U.S. Weather Station is in the foreground. Between 1862 and 1892, what is now Port Angeles was a military reserve that included the spit and a strip of land a mile deep. Buildings were therefore restricted to the beach. When the reserve was opened for settlement in 1892, several thousand transients walked the streets, awaiting the opportunity to stake their claim on the hill above the city. General John Noble, Secretary of the Interior, came to Port Angeles about 1893 to officially open the reserve for settlement. He's the gentleman in the back of the buggy with the whiskers. The man with the tall hat is Port Angeles' first doctor, F.S. Lewis. This view from the bluff shows the Morse dock. Ships in the harbor are seen in this 1895 photograph taken from 2nd and Jerry. This is a view in 1897, 5 years after the reserve was opened. Every home had a fence. Since there was no herd laws, livestock run loose through the town, and fences kept animals out rather than in. An example of a city ordinance decreeing that no one will drive over 6 miles per hour in the city. This law was still on the books until 1973. This is the first City Council of Port Angeles in 1880. The first lighthouse, built at the end of Edith's Hook, was completed in 1865. The light was operated by kerosene, and the siren was run by steam. This is the fog bell and the boiler house next to the lighthouse. In the daytime, or when the fog wasn't too thick, the lighthouse keeper could use the bell instead of the siren. This cut his duties down. He no longer had to carry so much water or cut so much wood. George Venable Smith organized the Puget Sound Cooperative Colony close to Port Angeles in 1887. It was designed to be a small nation within a nation, a utopian society where there would be no taxes, no unemployment, free lights, free water, and free medical care. The colony bought up land at the mouth of Enos Creek, the site of the former Rainier Mill. The first members of the colony arrived in June of 1887. This is a view of the hotel they built to house the members until homes were built. This is a view of the colony from the bluff, and Enos Creek is running into the bay. To become a member, one had to buy a share at the cost of $10 and one lot at $40. This is an example of a share. If you were able to, you could buy more shares or more lots. This 1889 view shows the East End Hotel and the colony buildings from the bay. The colony mill at the right was the first lumber mill, and it was used to build the first school, the first church, and the old opera house. The little house on the beach is an example of the early sanitation facilities, cleaned with the rise and fall of the tide. This is a close-up of the old colony mill, which furnished the lumber for many of the buildings in Port Angeles. The export of shingles, seen being loaded here, was the main support of the community for many years. Port Angeles' first church and congregation met in this shed in Lower Pine Hill. This picture was taken about 1888. The first church built in Port Angeles was the First Congregational Church, and it still stands at First and Vine. It was built by the Cooperative Colony in 1889 from lumber sawed by the colony's mill. Port Angeles was always looking for a way to advertise, and they thought they'd found one here, a dead whale floating out in the strait. It was floated to Hollywood Beach, but with the hot summer weather it was quickly towed away again. First Street is being extended down towards Valley Creek in this photo. The fill was done with mine cars and mules. Much of Front Street at this time is still on pilings. This is a view looking north on Laurel Street from the top of the hill down to Morse Dock. On the right, a bandstand for entertainment and dances remains permanently in place since there is no traffic to block. Front Street, on the sandy beach, was a muddy mess in the wintertime and little better in summer. In 1908 it was decided to fix the street, but with no money, the city conscripted volunteer work parties of all able-bodied men to cut down some trees, saw planks, and plank the street. A strong winter storm that winter washed the entire effort away. This is the Port Angeles Fire Department in action in 1900. They didn't have to go far for this one, however. The building on fire was around the corner from the fire hall. The old City Hall and fire station were seen here in 1910. This building was located at First and Oak Street before the federal building was built there. From 1889 to 1923, this building was the Opera House, the center of community life in Port Angeles. Built by the Puget Sound Cooperative Colony and dedicated in early 1891, it had the only flush toilet in Port Angeles for the time. The building was razed in 1923 and the Olympus Hotel was built on this site. The hotel was later destroyed by a large gas explosion September of 1971. This is the Elks Convention on Front Street about 1910. Hollywood Beach was a favorite stopping place for Native Americans when they were traveling up and down the strait. When this photo was taken, the Makah tribe were the primary users of the beach, as the majority of the Klallam tribe had been moved on reservations on the Hood Canal. This is Front and Lincoln Street with Hollywood Beach in the background. A livery stable is on the right and horses were rented to the public. Refuge was dumped on the beach and was removed by the next high tide. The original Klallam County Courthouse was the former Catholic Church on 2nd and Lincoln. This view of the first courthouse shows the new courthouse in the distance, which was completed in 1914. The picture shows a slide which was set up to transfer the records more easily. Port Angeles had a rock quarry up Tumwater Creek. Most of the stone was exported to other areas of Washington. This picture is dated 1903. A well-known establishment in early Port Angeles was the Barrel Factory, located on Valley Creek. The factory stopped production about 1920 when the brewery, a good customer, closed down. This is the view in 1916 looking north on Laurel after the street had been planked. The building at the right is a tavern at Front and Lincoln. This was taken in 1908 before the street was planked. Norman Smith, the son of Victor Smith, is shown here holding the horse's reins. Norman was the second mayor of Port Angeles and a promoter of the town his father founded 30 years before. Here we're looking east on Front Street from Oak in 1912. Here we're looking south on Laurel Street in 1908. You can see that some of the planking remains after winter storms washed the rest away. The Central School on First and Vine was located where the Port Angeles Post Office building stands today. The First Congregational Church is on the left, and on the right was the First Methodist Church. The 1907 4th of July celebration parade on the corner of First and Laurel was led by Dr. Lewis's one-cylinder 1906 Rio car. In front of the Merchants Hotel are 3 stages loaded with people heading for the Salduck Hot Springs. Behind Dr. Lewis's 1906 Rio is the first telephone exchange in Port Angeles on First near Oak. Frank Dustman was one of the early marshals in Port Angeles in the uniform of the day. Port Angeles' first telephone exchange was on West First near Oak. The cannery was established in Port Angeles in 1891. It was at the west end of the present Boat Haven on Marine Drive. This is the dock for the cannery where fish and clams were unloaded for processing. This photo looks inside the cannery. At the time, fish were just split down the middle and a fillet was cut from each side and the rest was thrown away. Inside the cannery, workmen processed the fish. The finished product. 6 tons of solder was used in sealing these cans. In 1903, after many years of dreaming, Port Angeles had its first railroad. 3 miles of track was laid up Tumwater Valley, and the rolling stock came in on a barge. A locomotive, a tender, and 1 flat car. The Norman No. 1 with all the local dignitaries are ready for their first trip up Tumwater Valley in this photo. This is the banquet in 1903, which was held in the big tent at the rock quarry on Tumwater Valley to celebrate the opening of Norman Smith's railroad. The return trip of Port Angeles dignitaries down Tumwater on that first train. This is a close-up of the Norman 1. It sat on the tide flats near the Boat Haven for years and became scrap for World War I. This is the last surviving member of the Puget Sound Cooperative Colony that was organized in 1887. Madge Naylor was 7 years old when she came with her parents and was city treasurer for nearly 30 years. This photo was taken about 1900. Most of the cabins here were made of logs in the early days. This cabin was located between P and C on 8th Street. The fireplace was made of wood and lined inside with mud. This cabin stood at 4th and Chase, where the Clallam County Courthouse is now located. Falling Firs Ranch was located just east of Port Angeles, where the Monroe School stands now. The Henry McGuire Homestead stood where the Port Angeles High School is now on East Park. The photo was taken in 1915. The first jail was located on West 1st Street near Oak. This photo was taken in 1914. Baseball was one of the early day sports Port Angeles men enjoyed. All the little towns and communities, including Joyce, Blinn, Squim, and Dungeness, had teams, and every Sunday they would play. The first movie theater in Port Angeles was the Star Theater in 1906. It was on the north side of Front Street near Laurel. Having no sound, a piano was played to match the movie on the screen. This automobile stage in front of the Merchants Hotel ran to Squim, Dungeness, and Blinn. Harness shops were necessary business enterprises of the day. Every workhorse had to have a collar. The shop was near 1st and Oak Streets. Port Angeles had a brewery on Tumwater Creek when this photo was taken in 1910. In 1919, when Prohibition was voted in for the nation, the brewery went out of business and was torn down. City Transfer Stables stood along the Morse Dock at the foot of Laurel Street in 1913.